Running backs have been getting absolutely screwed when it comes to contracts lately, but why are teams so scared to drop a bag on their star backs? At one point, you could have argued that running back was the most important position on the field, but it's been decades since those days, and their value has only declined over time. It's only getting worse too, and the league's top backs are starting to act. Derrick Henry said, "What's the point in to just simply take the position out of the game?" Jonathan Taylor essentially said that it doesn't matter what you do if you're a running back. And Austin Eckler said that running backs are getting treated basically like they're discardable widgets. Now, running backs have become less and less valued in today's game, but the most recent straw was the fact that Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard all didn't get long-term deals this offseason, something Christian McCaffrey called criminal. There were 3 running backs that were franchise tagged this offseason: Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard. On the tag, it's just a 1-year contract worth just over $10 million, but it keeps the team from not having to give out a long-term deal. All 3 were hoping for that long-term deal, but none of them got an extension this offseason, despite all coming off of 1,000-yard seasons. Josh Jacobs just led the league in rushing yards with 1,650 yards and scored 12 touchdowns. In his 4-year career in the league, he has over 4,700 yards and 40 touchdowns. Still, the Raiders decided not to pick up his 5th-year option and now are able to keep him in Vegas with the tag. Saquon Barkley has spent 5 seasons with the Giants because he actually played on his option last year. He has 4,200 yards and 29 touchdowns in the pros and missed almost the entire 2020 season due to a torn ACL. Finally, Tony Pollard is coming off of by far the best year of his career and his only 1,000-yard season. And he's the new number 1 in Dallas after Ezekiel Elliott was released. In 2021, Pollard really started playing well with over 700 yards, but before that, he was really buried behind Zeke for the first 2 years of his career. In my opinion, it's kind of a shock that they didn't get extended. I mean, I kind of maybe understand Tony Pollard just because of how small of a sample size we really have to look at, but both Saquon and Josh Jacobs, in my opinion, have done plenty to prove their value to their teams, but that doesn't seem to matter to their front offices. Not only are the fans finally starting to notice the decline in the running back market, but so are the running backs. And what's sad is that it's probably only going to get worse. There are still some pretty big name running backs that are without teams with training camp starting: Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, and Leonard Fournette. The Cowboys ended up releasing Zeke to save money, and his production was really starting to decline. He was in Dallas for 7 years and had over 900 yards every season except for in 2022. He also led the league in carries and rushing yards twice, but those were earlier in his career. He's definitely taken a step back, and now he's still without a team for now. Dalvin Cook has really been the big name that is still a free agent though. The Vikings released him this offseason, again to save money. Since his first 2 years in the pros, he's had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons and has well solidified himself as a top back in the league. Still, that didn't keep him from being released. The last pretty big name is really Leonard Fournette. Now, he hasn't been anywhere close to the production of the other guys, but it's still a surprise that he's on the open market. His last 1,000-yard season was back in 2019, which was his 3rd and final season in Jacksonville. Then he's been in Tampa for the last 3 years, and his best season was in 2021 when he had over 800 yards. Like the other 2, Fournette was also released. Really, a running back in today's game is either going to be released or have to take a pay cut. Joe Mixon has 3 1,000-yard seasons in 6 years, but it was even expected that he was going to be released this offseason. He wasn't, but he did have to take a $3.4 million pay cut just to stay with the Bengals. Running back value has completely tanked in recent years, but what events have led us to this point where running backs don't seem to matter as much as they used to? Well, there's a few situations that have gotten us to this point, and maybe the biggest was the famous Le'Veon Bell holdout. From 2013 to 2017, Le'Veon Bell was one of the best running backs in football. He had 3 different 1,000-yard seasons and was an all-pro in each of those seasons. Coming into the 2018 offseason, he had just 1,200 yards in back-to-back years. Well, the Steelers decided to franchise tag him, and Bell wasn't having it. He decided to hold out and wait for a long-term deal that never ended up coming. coming. It was such a crazy thing at the time, and Pittsburgh had to turn to their backup, James Conner, and the Steelers' offense didn't skip a beat. James Conner had a better yards per carry than Bell did the season before by half a yard. Conner had almost 1,000 yards and had 500 receiving yards with 13 total touchdowns despite only playing in 13 games. He single-handedly destroyed running back value. Instead of paying their elite level running back, the Steelers instead just had a guy in a rookie deal start over him who was fresh, and it worked. It really did show just how important a supporting cast had on a running back. Le'Veon Bell did eventually get paid like he wanted, but it came with the Jets on a 4-year, $52.5 million deal. He ended up with a career worst 3.2 yards per carry and had less than 800 yards and just 3 touchdowns despite playing in 15 games. He wasn't nearly as good and ended up being released the next season. He then bounced around to the Chiefs, Ravens, and Buccaneers over the next year and a half and hasn't played since. Clearly, the situation in Pittsburgh was a big reason for his success. Now, around the time Le'Veon Bell was holding out, by far the best running back in the league was Todd Gurley. Looking back, it's honestly hard to explain just how good Todd Gurley was. He came into the league in 2015 and immediately dominated. He had 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, but he was only about to get better. The biggest thing with Gurley was how he was used in both the run game and the passing game. Then his third year in the league was his best when Sean McVay had taken over as the head coach. Gurley had 1,300 yards, 800 receiving yards, and 19 total touchdowns, 13 of which were rushing, which led the league, by the way. Gurley was even the offensive player of the year. Then he turned around and led the league in rushing touchdowns again in 2018 with 17 and had 21 total. Plus, Gurley rushed for 1,200 yards and had 600 receiving yards. Gurley really was on a different level, and it got him a 4-year, $60 million deal, making him the highest paid running back in the NFL. Well, at the running back position, you get banged up, and it's why those guys don't really last that long in the league. Gurley had torn his ACL at Georgia and ended up with arthritis in his knee. In 2018, when the Rams made that Super Bowl run, Gurley slowly disappeared while CJ Anderson filled in as the top back in the postseason. Gurley's knee just kept having issues, and it led to a down 2019 season, and then he was released that offseason. In 2020, he was fine for the Falcons with almost 700 yards, but he hasn't played since and has said he's done playing pro football. In a short span, Gurley went from arguably the best player in the sport to out of the game. Running backs over the past decade have just simply not been worth it, and that's why it's hard to actually blame general managers or coaches for the way the position has been treated. At the end of the day, the best way to go about running backs recently has been to draft a young running back and maybe franchise tag them once if they're actually worth it. Then draft a different young running back and do it all over again. Even when you look at the top and most valuable backs in the league, their teams don't seem to really want them that much. The Panthers traded away Christian McCaffrey to save money and kick off their rebuild, and don't forget that the Titans seem to want to get rid of Derrick Henry this offseason. From a front office perspective, the position is just way too replaceable and not very important in today's game like it once was. It's important to have a balanced offense that can both run the ball and pass the ball, but it seems like the importance of a successful pass-heavy offense has kind of taken over the run game in recent years, and that's why the quarterback and wideout market has seemed to boom while the running back market continues to decline. The league is changing faster than it ever has, and I don't really know how to change the value of how guys are getting paid, but there are other positions that are undervalued too. It's just easier to highlight the running backs. Ultimately, when building a successful team in today's league, any running back could succeed with a good enough supporting cast, and I'd have to assume that's why they aren't getting paid. I'm not saying there aren't running backs out there who can carry their teams to the playoffs, like Saquon Barkley did this last season, but teams aren't willing to gamble on another Gurley or Bell, and honestly, I don't really blame them.